is telling us as men to be common, to fall in line, to fall short of any visions or plans God has for us. But what about being uncommon? This is a movement of men seeking to build an eternal legacy. A journey of men on mission to rise above the common, to experience sustainable life change. This is Uncommon Disciple. Welcome to the Uncommon Disciple podcast. My name is Michael Bowen. With me as always, it's Jared Gibson. And back with us, we're blessed to have our good friend Jimmy Graham with us. What's up, Jimmy?
What's up, guys? How you doing? Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it's good to see you tonight, and excited to have you on to talk about some things that might be a little controversial. Some things that happened about a week and a half ago. I think some time has lapsed, and I was excited to have you on because we had some discussions about the subject that we're going to talk about tonight, and I'm excited to dig in. So, Jared, are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right. So we're going to talk about the slap heard around the world, and we're a little late.
I'm a little nervous.
Yeah.
He's giddy going into this conversation here. He's ready to rock.
No, it's a week, like I said, almost a week and a half has played out now from this event, and we're a little late getting on board, but I was thankful that some time had gone by, because it now gives some perspective and some play out, some fallout that's occurred, since this incident happened at the Oscars. And, just like I listened to your podcast, Jimmy, and I had no idea this incident had even occurred, until I was on Instagram surfing through and I saw a bunch of Jiu Jitsu memes with Will Smith, slapping Chris Rock, and then these funny memes, that were attached to the photos. And, normally I wouldn't give much attention to something like this, first of all, because it's Hollywood, right? I don't know what's real and what's not real. And I even said to you, I think right after it happened, how do we know this wasn't staged, right? And Jimmy, because he's a study of people and situations, he says, well, you can just look at Chris Rock's face and see the setup. And, you kind of studied, whether or not this could have been staged. And you came to the conclusion that it wasn't staged. But let's make some assumptions. Will Smith is not a believer in Christ. We're going to make that assumption. We're going to make an assumption that Chris Rock is a non-believer in Jesus Christ, only because we would know them by their fruit if they were producing fruit. And I don't know if either one of them has professed Christ at all in their life. And certainly I haven't seen anything in their life that would represent a Christ-driven life. Does that make sense? So let's make those assumptions. But, as the situation unfolded, Chris Rock was doing some commentary, and he made a comment in reference to G.I. Jane, which I thought was interesting. Did you ever see that movie?
Yeah.
Right. So this is where Demi Moore shaved her head, and she was going to be the first female Navy SEAL. Right. And it's interesting because now they're trying to push that agenda a little bit now in the Navy. And he was alluding to this idea of a shaved head because Will Smith's wife, Jada Pinkett Smith, has a shaved head, and it's because of an underlying medical condition, is what we've later learned. And what I loved about your podcast was that you had a gal named Kate. Mm-hmm. What's her last name? Is it
Dalby?
Dalby. So someone you obviously respect, and she brought a female perspective into the situation. And because I appreciate your perspective, I wanted to hear a little bit about what you learned from that discussion with her. And then obviously we'll talk about escalations, right? Because you teach personal defense, right, as it relates to weapons. And when is it appropriate to escalate something to the degree that caused Will Smith to get out of his chair and slap Chris Rock in the mouth, right? Now we can all sit here and agree or disagree whether or not that was an appropriate step for the moment, right? But we want to look at this from a Christ-centered perspective, and obviously make the assumptions as they're biblically driven, not flesh driven, right? Because in my flesh, yes, I think it was appropriate to get up and smack someone in the mouth that disrespected my wife. But at the same time, I just like to take a look at it from a biblical perspective. So, let's dig in.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So tell me your thoughts, Jimmy, after having the discussion with Kate and getting a female perspective, and letting some time play out and some of the fallout occur. has any perspective changed from the discussions that you've had with, Kate initially on your podcast?
A little bit. It really opened a door. Obviously this conversation started in a business meeting. So she's, part of our staff. She's been with us a while. And obviously I respect her opinion a great deal, or she would have been on the podcast, right? But it started going down a road that I liked. I liked opening doors, this has become a professional development year for me. I didn't mean for it to, but I just got back from Vegas. I was doing some crime prevention through environmental design studies. It's a class out there to get the advanced certificate from there. And just came at a really good time. And I said, hey, Kate, can we put a pin in this? And can you come on the podcast and have this discussion? I go, if nothing else, we could have the discussion and respect each other and ready break, you know what I mean? And show the world that can be done again. Yeah. And I've already gotten texts from buddies that were, or phone calls from buddies. I mean, these are men, just burly, whatever. And they're like, thank you for having a discussion with someone else and finishing as respectfully. Sure. Right. The things that, obviously there's much more intel. There's much more truth that came out. Like, why was he bubbling over? That's stuff that was unknown. And what I've taken away from this ordeal, and I'm going to stand by. I'm so glad this happened. I'm so glad this happened at the Oscars. Yes. I'm so glad that room of people got to see, I'll call it a man thing. And I'm not saying a good man or a real man, because it exploded with that. Real men do this. Yeah. And I even followed up with something on Facebook, was because people were going at each other. I've had to calm people down on my Facebook post, that were going at each other. And now here comes the language. And I got on there and I said, hey guys, you can have an opinion. Yep. You will be respectful and you'll be appropriate on my post. Right. And, I'm expecting the fight, right? The keyboard warrior fight. And instead it was like, sorry, Jimmy, I cleaned it up. And they went back and took it out of there. But
listen, if Jimmy Graham texted me or called me out on something, I'd be like, okay, Jimmy, I'll take a look at that.
Well, and that's the deal. Like, in reality, they can do whatever they want. They can say whatever they want. I'm expecting them to say, you're not the boss of me. I can do whatever I want. Right. And I already had my joke ready. Great. Now I have to find some young person to show me how to unfriend you. I don't even know how this social media stuff works, but really that's all I can say is, hey man, I'm just going to pull you off and unfriend you. And that's silly even saying that.
And I say that tongue in cheek, Jared, because Jimmy and I spend an hour every Friday at 9 a.m. grappling one another on the mats. And we have a lot of fun. So tactically, he could take me out in a heartbeat.
What I've learned from this whole ordeal is that I'm just now opening a page to this conversation. I'm so glad this door got opened about what is a man's, duty to respect women, yes, to the mid-level, I call it mid-level confrontation, right? And let me just jump back to the 25-year-old Jimmy Graham, right? You've never known this guy. You probably wouldn't want to. For sure. Was very good at just taking it, just being like suppressing, maybe not defending somebody, and then just letting it build up and then have that manifest elsewhere later. That's also not healthy. And I was very quick to just punch somebody in the face. Like I chip on my shoulder, mostly fear-based and, egotistical stuff. I could do both ends of it, but I could never do the middle part. And I didn't know that, right? Till I was a grown man later in life, that I wasn't good at handling things at the mid-level. Meaning, I've taught this, and you heard this on my podcast. I had a guy who was in his 60s, and he was very disrespectful to my staff. We shared a building. He would come in the middle of a class and just spout something off. And I got him alone. I said, hey brother, I'm not sure what I did or my staff did to make you think that was okay, but you don't get to talk to me like that. Do you understand me? And he kind of like, well, yeah. And I just looked him right in the eyes and I said, hey, I get all that. You do not get to talk to me like that. Do you understand me? And it was very awkward. And he said some silly stuff and I just held my gaze and we became friends, right? I don't think he knew he was doing it, right? I don't think that he meant that. It's just, he's the grouchy old dude and everybody kind of knew that. And like, literally months later, he came in and like, it's funny, like old dude arts and crafts went and cut out these Bible verses, laminated them in a machine and said, hey, I did this at home and could you hand this to guys? And I'm like, what just happened, man? Like I had no idea where he stood with his walk through Christ, his relationship, all that stuff. But I think that people, including myself, just don't understand that that's where it is. Like that's where it's at. Now, this thing that just happened that exposed all this, guy gets up and just boils over on stage. Yeah. That's as real as it gets. So that's the part that thing inside him saying, I'll defend my wife. And at that time I didn't know about their open marriage. I didn't know about, that this isn't the first time that Chris Rock has aimed at her. Sure. Right. It's not, and there's this love, there's this respect for Jada Smith and Tupac's love. I didn't know that in that community, the rap community, that's like this respected and holy kind of, this is what love is. And Will Smith has talked about how he feels about that. He doesn't feel like he'll ever measure up to that. Right. So there's just there's a lot more going on here.
Well, when Jimmy and I initially had this conversation, I don't want to say I was defending a non-response or an appropriate response. I was looking for a Christ-centered response that I don't know that would necessarily be physical. Now, in all honesty, as I go back and I pray through this, I don't know what my reaction would be at that point. Like you had mentioned, what was going on in his heart at the time? What were some of the things that were battling? Did him and Jada have a conversation right before this thing went down? And then he looks over at his wife and sees that she's hurt. And that just set something off in him immediately that caused him out. So now, I think a lot of guys can listen in on this and go, well, I would have done this or I would have done that. And I don't know if that's necessarily the reflection of reality for a couple of reasons, right? Number one is there's been times where guys have in their car honked their horn and started doing things. And I grapple guys 6 days a week, 2 to 3 times a day, right? And I've been doing this fairly consistently for 7 years, right? I'm not the average everyday guy that just has been on the couch, so I can handle myself. And I don't go around with a big chest and go, I can just go handle anyone. But I don't know if I got out of the car if it would go down well for the other guy, right? I just don't know. And it reminds me of something that happened in the middle of last year. I don't know if you guys saw it, but there was a video of this guy named Joe Schilling, an MMA professional fighter. So I'll break the scene down for you. Evidently, there was a guy in the bar that was highly intoxicated, and he's sitting there, talking to this little crowd of people. And Joe comes walking by and accidentally bumps the guy. Well, the guy says something to Joe, and Joe turns around and he gives him a little flinch. And before he knew it, Joe threw a fist up and knocked the guy out and laid him out flat. Right. So it's like, it reminds me of Eddie Gallagher, right? He's another SEAL that has this thing, F around and find out, right? It's like slapped and get slapped, and expect that something like that can happen. You never know who you're dealing with, right? So I think with guys, a lot of times our pride and ego gets put up to this degree, and we say, well, I would have done that, and I wouldn't even have just slapped Chris, but I would have just kicked him, I would have kicked him on the ground, right? And then others were like, I don't know if that deserved a slap, maybe I would have handled it after and, maybe roughed them up behind the scenes and not on national TV where there could have been some exposure. But it's the reality of what was appropriate, what's not appropriate, what would I have done in that situation. But after reflecting on our conversation, I really went back and I was, praying through it. And I went, Lord, I don't know what I would have done in that situation because I don't know where he was at. Number one, he's not a believer. I'm going to make that assumption that he's a non-believer. But even as a believer in Christ, I have not reacted or represented God in godly ways when I know I should have. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. So that's a perspective that I was able to kind of work through after listening to your podcast and even listening to Kate's perspective, because she had some strong arguments against the response that Will had. What do you think, Jared?
Yeah, I mean, kind of going off of what you said, a lot of times we always play through the scenarios. Well, if I was in this situation, I would do that, right? It kind of goes down to, like, first example, obviously, is Jiu Jitsu, right? You can sit all day long on YouTube and you can watch every single Jiu Jitsu video. You can watch every single tap out move, but it's a whole different ball game when you're actually on the mat, when the timer's on, when the clock's ticking, and then you have an opponent that you've never seen before, and you don't know what he's about to bring to the match. And I think too often we get caught up in the comparison game and the games of, well, I could do that and do that. But at the end of the day, I mean, you can talk the game, but how's your mind? And are you mentally actually prepared for that situation?
I think so. We have a saying at Able Shepherd, the interview started 3 years ago, right? We're talking about work. We're talking about, And it comes from a story of me being asked to interview probably 20 people, right, for this job. And it was for another organization. Would you sit down and interview these people? I go, no. They're like, don't you think you owe them that? I'm like, no, I know all of them. There's only 3 dudes that we're even going to consider.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, they're like, well, isn't it fair to sit down with everyone? No, the interview started 3 years ago. You can't put on a tie, walk in and pretend to be a different dude.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that it's hilarious to me. And I really wish that, you know, like, that Jocko and Joe Rogan would have explored this. Cause man, I'd love to talk to them in person and be like, you mean to tell me that if I started, like, if you put this into walk in the room and just really start mashing his wife in front of him, because you've heard, and Chris Rock wasn't, that was a mild joke, right? But you've heard like Andrew Dice Clay, you've heard some rough people.
Yeah.
If they were going down that road, I don't honestly believe that those guys would be like, well, you know, let's just leave, honey. Maybe,
Yeah.
you know, maybe.
Well, like you, that's why I wouldn't go to a comedy club with
right.
my wife, right?
Well, you know, but why shouldn't you be able to, is my point. You know, like this 50 years ago, that people go, the slap wasn't that bad. I'm sorry. They go, the joke wasn't that bad. I go, neither was the slap. And Jocko did say this. In the SEAL team, we call that Tuesday.
No, for
you
sure.
run your mouth and I get up and smack you. It's like, thank you for checking me. You know, it's like, all right, I got out of line and now I'm not. Let's go have a beer. That's the real deal. But I understand a 48-year-old Christian Jimmy Graham that's aspiring to do better. That's not the answer. I know that, right? But I'm not ready to say that it isn't I have felt God in my heart tell me to stand up for people, right? At a mid-level confrontation. I don't believe he's ever told me to punch somebody in the face. Maybe. Some of them, you know, some of them I'm very proud of. You know what I mean? Some of these things got out of hand and I handled them and it was a very good deal and I'm proud of those. Others, I'm not. You know what I mean? Others I could have walked away and I wish I would have, I just didn't. Right. Whether I got in trouble or not, that's another story, but I'm just not proud of them because I think that I could have handled them better. But again, I just wasn't that guy, you know? So I think that, like you said, is that there are people on Facebook that are spouting off talking about what a real man is. Real man. Better yet, their wives, a real man. And I'm like, you know what? I know you guys, you're not particularly strong. I don't know that you're an authority on what a real man is.
For sure.
You know, so that's where I'm saying, like, it's easy to chime in and talk about this stuff. And to say like, oh, he's a coward and he's not a real man. Yeah, he's broken. That's evident to the world now. And he's going to pay big dividends for that. Have you ever walked across a room and punched somebody in the face or slapped them? It's not an easy thing to do. Yeah. So I know that people, and I'm going to go on a limb here, but I truly am working my way through this. I'm thinking about this a lot. I'm praying about this and I'm studying scripture about this, is that people say from a position of weakness, they say, well, I was a bigger man. I just turned the other cheek. I'm like, that's all you got, bro. That's all you got. Because you can't do anything else. Now, if you were strong and you turn the other cheek, that's just a bigger statement. Or if you were strong and you said, you know what, I'm going to step up for this person. You stepped in there and got your tail kicked. There's honor in that too, right?
For sure.
It doesn't mean you have to win. Sometimes you got to stand. But I think this world has been softer until all they have is weakness and they blame God for that. And I'm not down with that. I'm not down with the Mother Teresa Jesus. I don't believe it.
Yeah. You know, I have to agree in the sense that, man, if God's calling you to step up and defend the weak, then I think that's a worthy and righteous calling for sure. No doubt in my mind. And I can't argue what God is calling you to do or what God is calling Jared to do. I know this, like you, there have been times in my past where there was something in my heart saying to do this and I didn't do it. And I walked away and went, I know I should have done it. I should have done this, or I should have done whatever it was, you know, that was stirring up in my heart. And what happens when we don't step up and step out when we know we should, right? Just like what you said, the unhealthy emotions start to occur, right? And it starts coming out in other ugly ways.
Yeah.
Right. Now I'm stepping out inappropriately, at inappropriate times that I escalate things to a degree that I shouldn't do in such a short amount of time, versus, you know, being patient and thinking
and to
through
be
the
clear,
process.
I'm not talking about vengeance.
Yes.
I think it's very clear that vengeance is the Lord's.
For sure.
Right? I'm not saying, some guy cut me off and then I say, hey man, let's go grab some baseball bats. I'm not saying that, right? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about.
Have you ever thought it though?
I've done it. Like, what are you talking about? I've done it. Like, you know, it's like, but not for cutting off. But
I sometimes picture just like driving people off the road. Like I wish we could just play like bumper cars.
Yeah, and you know, we joke at the shop, and I think we've got a pretty healthy grasp on this. Is that have you seen The Town? it's a Matt Damon movie.
Oh, yeah, for
but it's
sure.
good.
Mhm.
Like, I'm not a big Matt Damon fan, but it's not Matt Damon. I'm sorry, Ben Affleck.
Ben Affleck. Yeah.
And the other guy, Jeremy somebody. But when he goes in there and something happened and he walks into his buddy, and guys like this, we like it in entertainment, right? He walks in and he goes, "Hey, I need your help. We're going to go hurt some people. You can't ask any questions." And he's like, "Whose car are we taking?" Like, that's the only question he's got. It's like, it's cool to, have boys.
Whose car are we
like
taking?
that. That's a cool thought,
Yeah.
but it's just not right. We know that. We know that that's not healthy. We know that's going to lead nowhere good. Vengeance is the Lord's. I'm talking about in the moment. Are you willing to give up? Like, for somebody to say, not a comedy club, an award for Jimmy Graham to go get an award for a thing you do for a living. But by walking in the door, Rachel Graham's off. She's now it's no holds barred. I'm like, it's off limits to Rachel Graham. That's never a thing. Like, you don't ever talk about her like that. Just like if I talked about your wife or your daughters, I would expect to get slapped.
Yeah.
We're in a war. Like, we may lose the battle without ever firing around, like that kind of thing. People are like, I'm ready to get after it. I'm ready to do something. I'm like, man, you're losing battles 10 times a day. You're not standing for anything. Again, I'm not saying shoot a dude. I'm not saying stab a dude or even smack a guy, but that thing to take a stand boldly, to enter that mid-level and see where that goes. I think that men have lost that art. I truly do. So that's the thing where I think that may, perhaps that does please God. Now, again, I'm not saying that Will Smith did any of that because he's a train wreck and obviously boiled over for the world to see, but it was real.
Yes.
Right. How many guys are feeling that? That's why I love that this conversation was open.
For sure. I mean, I think, I agree with you that I'm thankful that this happened because it opens up dialogue and discussion, because I believe that there is a spiritual war against what it means to be a man in today's society, right? There's so many differing opinions that you see young men very confused, not knowing what their role is as a young man, growing up in a household, right? A lot of them, there's many young men growing up in single mother homes.
Yeah.
Right. And so they don't have a male figure in their life teaching them the things that they should be learning as young men. Right. And so what happens? The world sees an opening now and goes, we're going to teach them how to be young men.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be the view of what a biblical young man is supposed to be and how they're supposed to act. Yep. Right. So I think that that we are in a real spiritual war against biblical manhood. And I agree with you in the sense that there is this dichotomy, right? We're not to be Rambos, plowing down everything that just gets in our way. But we're also, we're not to be so passive that we just let everything get by us without protecting those that are close to us, right? And neglecting our God-given responsibility as protectors and providers. Yeah. And I joked around with Jared and said this. I said, if anyone ever hurt my wife or my daughters physically, I would just assume that God wants me in a prison ministry. I'll just assume that that's his will for my life. And it's, I say it jokingly, but in that case, I have no choice but to respond. Yeah. And it, depending on the level of physicality will depend on the level of response that comes from me.
And we talked about that as like, what is abuse? There must be, like, our words mean something. We must define this and say, what is that? Because if you were, and I made this point on our podcast, was if I abused my wife, if I harmed my wife, and then we're sitting there and heaven forbid, we're never getting a divorce, but if we're sitting there with a divorce attorney, right? And they said, well, he's abused her. And they said, well, what has he done? Well, he makes fun of my hair because I have this disease and I had to shave my head, and he makes jokes about it. Brother, you're signing over your checkbook. That's the deal, right? That is harm that you've done. It's long-term harm, right? So did he harm Jada? It's funny, like right now, to hear this group of people saying, it's just words. Really? Are you so weak that words, like, well, hold on a second. A week ago, it was abuse. So did you harm my wife, right? So, and I shared this, and I don't think she minds this, is my wife has a bit of anxiety going out into public places. She doesn't want me to honor her. She doesn't want me to do anything. Sometimes I'll say, hey, can you guys thank Rachel Graham for putting up a gym? She's like, just don't do it. Right. I don't want, just makes me uncomfortable. Right. And I'm thinking it's honoring. She just doesn't do it. So if somebody made fun of her in front of everybody, there will be long-term harm done that I will have to deal with for a long time.
You're dealing with the fallout.
That's right. I'm going to have to deal with this fallout because someone just harmed her. It's like if somebody walked over and cut my daughter, it's not going to kill her, but you harmed her. Like there's going to be problems here forever. psychologically, right? So for this to happen in front of the world and for them to flip on a dime and say, it's just words. I'm like, it's not actually. It's not just words.
Well, it reminds me of the 60-year-old man that you confronted, right? Because a lot of people will act in ways, and we saw this play out during the pandemic, right? We saw all kinds of crazy things, people yelling at people for not wearing masks. I saw a video the other day. We've been so conditioned, right? For this society of just don't question things that are happening. Just go along with the process. There was a guy standing out in front of a store with a lint roller, and he was telling people as they were rolling up to the store, do this. And he was lint rolling them like he was scanning them for weapons using a freaking lint roller.
What?
Not questioning. Right. So it freaked me out because I said, man, like, are we being conditioned not to respond? Right. That we can just say whatever we want and people are going to not question what we're saying or what we're doing. Right. So the 60-year-old man that's treating your staff like crap, he's never had someone call him out and say, hey, man, that's not okay.
Yeah.
Right. Or someone disrespects your wife or your daughter and you step in and go, that's not okay.
Yeah.
Right. Now it escalated to the level that Will went up and smacked the guy in the chops.
Yeah.
Right. And some people are questioning. I heard Jim Carrey, give a little bit of a commentary about this. Well, he shouldn't have physically assaulted him. And, he had his own opinion. But again, I question everyone that has an opinion. I don't know if they know what they would have done in that same exact circumstance. Right. We can all say and have an opinion about what we think we would have done. But I don't know if that reality
And if you go back
true.
to that 3 to 5 years, right?
Yes.
So this is the thing that I've got on Facebook. A real man would have put his arm around him and said, brother, here's the blah, blah, blah. What I would have done is, and you know what the world's saying, including his wife? No, you wouldn't. I know you. You'd have sat in that chair. You would have let me take this like you have 20 times. Am I even married to a real man, right? That's the internal dialogue. Or some ladies are like, well, I would want my husband to go do exactly the same and just pray about, okay, that's cool. I dig it. You can say whatever you want, but we know the deal. Like, it's like the interview started 3 years ago. It's like, I've known you a long time. I don't think you've done anything, like not one thing. And I know other guys that probably would have done worse. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that either one of those are healthy, but pretending you're the guy that's going to walk up and handle that in this Christ-like, just teach the world a lesson thing. Okay, if the facts back that up, I believe you. If they don't, I just simply don't.
In the video that you showed me a few weeks ago, where this lady, you had a video of it was a surveillance video of a woman that just walks up and randomly starts slashing this family's face, the kids, and the dad has no idea what to do as this is happening, right? Because first of all, he probably wasn't trained to respond, right? But he also was probably so surprised that this could happen that he wasn't in the mindset to realize that we are in a real battle, that there is evil that walks the world. Now, again, Chris Rock didn't go and slash someone's face with a knife in this case. He slashed them with their words. But many guys might have just sat in a chair and not have done nothing, right? They just would have sat there and put their head down and laughed a little bit and looked over at their hurt wife and didn't even address or say, that's not okay for you to do. Right.
Yeah. So that video, just for the people that haven't seen it, it's horrific. And it just reminds us that people are losing their minds. Like you have no idea. Like you mentioned that, like you have no idea who you're talking to. What's the guy's name? Cowboy something. He's a UFC fighter.
Cerrone.
Cowboy Cerrone. Have you seen that where the guy goes, hey man, you just cut me off. And he turns around and he goes, I'm going to keep, he's like,
you're going to do what?
You're going to do what? He's like, I'm going to keep driving is what I'm going to do or whatever.
That had to be his buddy, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. But it's funny because
but that's another situation.
Right.
You start going off on a guy and you look at it, it was like, it's Cowboy Cerrone. In a couple of 100 fights professionally. He's like, I'm going to keep driving.
On that same vein, you have no idea. Like you say that, every stranger you meet, there's facts unknown. You have no idea who's hanging by a thread.
For sure.
I remember I worked at a high-end vehicle, like it was a, what do you call it when you get your detail shop, right?
Yeah.
For Mercedes, for a lot of this other stuff when I was a kid. And I remember this guy, man, and he was just hard on this other dude. And these guys are grown men, and I'm a kid, some other kids working there. These are grown men, they're detailing cars, right? So that's kind of where they're at. you don't know who's what, but this guy was just always, his guy's name was Joe. He was just bagging on Joe, bagging on Joe, bagging on Joe, bagging on Joe. And one day Joe didn't come in. We found out that he'd taken his life, right? He's a grown man, probably 40s, 50s years old, living in his dad's basement, went home, laid out plastic and just did something horrible, right?
Yeah.
So, and all I could think about was, man, I can't even imagine being this dude right now. Because there's this thick thing hanging in the room. And you know that everybody in this room knows all you did was rip on that guy all day.
Yeah.
You know? So you just never know who's gonna, you know, just totally just wear you out on the pavement. Sure. You never know who's hanging by a thread that might need an encouraging word. You never know who's gonna blow your head off, right? You don't know any of that. I've been punched in my face. You can probably tell by my shape of my nose. I watch my words. I measure them carefully, you know,
Absolutely.
and if I'm going to say it, it better be worth it because there's some little skin in the game.
Well,
right?
yeah, there could be a consequence
that's
to
right.
your action.
So sorry, tangent. This woman, for whatever reason, has lost her mind and she walks over. You just see this couple and they have 2 children and they're just walking around. I think it's a little backpack or whatever. And they're just like they're sightseeing or something, just walking in the street. This woman comes over with a knife about, 6 inches long, grabs the top of the kid's head and just runs this knife across their face. You guys saw the video. It's just like zip, 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 like a few times. And you're like,
it's disturbing.
Whoa, what just happened? And they all just freeze and look. And she leaves. And they go, what are you doing? Because the kid's not bleeding yet because it takes a second, right?
Yes.
So she leaves. She turns back around and the dad's like, what's up? And she walks right back over and stabs the other kid in the eye. And he's like, there's this, we call it buffering, right?
Yes.
That spinning buffering. Like, I don't know what to do. So I'm gonna stand here and just process. Well, she's already in gear, man. She just stabbed her other kid in the eye. So the first one, to be honest, it probably could have got any one of us. You're just walking down the street and somebody comes up and does something. You're like, what's that? But then you get to what we call, to get to them, you got to go through me. So between the package and the greatest threats, that's in the bodyguard world, that's how we say that. Get between the package and the greatest threat means at least stand there. Now, what are you doing? Now she comes back. Now it's just self-defense, right? I just level her, right? But that kind of thing. And then he just tries to flail and do something. She turns on the knife. He almost falls backwards and she walks away. She just crosses the street and she's out of there, right? So that kind of thing, the world keeps asking for men to stand, for somebody should do something. Where's all the men? I hear this in politics, all this stuff all the time. I'm like, where do you think they're going to come from? You're like trying to get rid of masculine men. And I'm not talking toxic masculinity. I'm talking about righteous masculinity, right? I can tell you where one's going to come from is Christian. His name's Christian Graham, right? I've got to make sure that I articulate this correctly, even that mid-level confrontation, because I don't want him to be in jail. I don't want him killing somebody. I don't want him doing all that stuff. But I do want him to have those skills to stand up and say, hey, here's the rules here. When you're dealing with me, here's the rules, right? And the only way I can show him is if I figure it out, right? Because this, again, thanks to Kate, this whole new thing came in. Actually, this situation with Will Smith, with Chris Rock, with the interview with Kate, all of this is helping Jimmy Graham solidify. I truly believe that happened might have been better for somebody down the road that I encounter, because I'm going to remember Will Smith and Chris Rock and say, that wasn't, show him, Jimmy. Because that's how I ended this conversation on Facebook, by the way. Everybody's chiming in, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, listen, guys, and I've heard enough of this. This is how we're going to wrap this up. Show me.
Yes.
You want to, you're a real man? And there's a quote, and it says from Marcus Aurelius, and it says, let us waste no more time talking about what a real man is. Be one. Like, show me. And then what I put on my text or my post was, by the way, the clock started 5 years ago. Like, I already know.
Yeah.
From having relationships with people, I already know what your response would be in that situation. And if you want to change that, start right now, right? Because there will be another thing. It won't be at the Oscars, and it won't be Will Smith and Chris Rock. It'll be Jimmy Graham and somebody else. And I have to figure this out before that happens.
Yeah.
Right. And the only way you're going to do it is live it. Because you know the deal. When you're spinning and that many cameras are on you and you're anxious and nervous, that's when the real stuff comes out.
Yeah.
Right. There's no time to put together a plan. You are knee deep in it and you got to figure it out right now. And he boiled over in front of everybody.
Well, this whole term of toxic masculinity that's going around society right now, right? It opposes a man to step up into this role, right? But I would argue that it's the same people that argue against men stepping up into this role are the same people that are against weapons.
Yeah.
But love that weapons protect them.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Right. In that regard, to where we want men to step up into this. And I too have sons, and I would hope that my actions are something that they could model and say, you know what? It's not okay that someone talks to my mom that way and they step into the gap. Right. know if I told you this, but during COVID, some old man was ramming his shopping cart into my wife's shopping cart, like physically, like get back 6 feet because your son doesn't have a mask. And I was like, I mean, this is, I think was last year, my son's sprouted in this last year. And I'm like, I think he would have hit the guy now, like an 80-year-old guy. Like I tell him to respect older men now, but I think with where his testosterone's at right now, he might have reacted in a different way. But he was just so taken back by it, and I said, I'm thankful I wasn't there.
Yeah.
Right? I think God was doing us a favor by not having me there, because that would not have been okay. Right? With someone physically using a shopping cart to push back on my wife, like that's just not okay.
And I think we do train people how to speak to us.
Yes.
Right. There's certain people you'll talk to a certain way, and you won't talk to certain people another way. Right.
For sure.
I don't want to make it sound like I'm just calling out 60-year-old men. I've called out Navy SEALs and been like, hey, I need to talk to you outside. And they're like, whoa, hey brother, what'd I say? I'm like, like I had a guy make fun. I think I talked about this. It's happened a couple times where because people understand, some people, their left and right flank are here, and some people they're more like this or whatever. And I came in, and it was your jokes. Like I said, if you want to be a good comedian, like I tell people at Able Shepherd, 1, if you're going to tell jokes, be funny. Number 2, not at somebody else's expense, right? Again, you never know anything. You don't know the facts about this guy.
Yes.
And then you make a joke at him and he levels you. And if I find out that he did, I'd be like, what'd you say? Well, I said, joked about his wife. Well, then sit there and bleed. That's the deal, right? But I've literally told Navy SEALs, it's like, hey brother, because I walk, little backstory. I walk in the room, there's a class going on. There's some Asian kids on the screen, and he's a buddy of mine. And he goes, he's about ready to teach this class. And he goes, hey, I pulled up some pictures of your cousins. And I go, roger that. Talk to you outside? He's like, uh-oh. He starts walking over, and I'm like, hey brother, let's go talk outside. And he goes, hey, I apologize. That will happen here. Let's have a chat out here. And he's like, he did not want to step out the door because he knows what's coming next. Right. Yeah. So right, wrong, or indifferent, there was a line. There was an understanding. Yeah. Like, this is how you talk to me. Yep. Right. And I don't know what would have happened. I probably have a pretty good guess in my 20s what would have happened. But there's been other times when I've just, when I've handled it very well, and been like, hey guys, not happening. There was a lady, and this is funny, kind of a funny story. I was in a Walmart, and I'm standing there with a buddy, and he's an agent, right? And I've got a pistol on. I got a CIA badge in my pocket. This is that part of my life, and you're just a professional guy, right? And we're standing there just because he's shopping. I'm just along for the ride because he drove, right? And this guy, when there used to not be 2 lanes for the self-checkout, there was one, and you'd split. And there's this little old woman, she's just the sweetest thing. And she's like, excuse me, sir, can you step behind the line? And he starts yelling at her like, what? So put up a sign. And she starts shrinking. And I'm like, just stare forward, and I can just see everybody goes quiet because he's screaming right top of his lungs. And I go, hey man, she's just doing her job. And now both barrels on me, right? Left and right, never forward, but left and right, left and right. Oh, who you think you are? And this is the part I would have done differently. I just said, why don't you quit talking like that? Probably not good to stoke the fire, right? Because he's already hot daddy mad, but he's and his girlfriend's with him, so it makes it worse, right? So he's just going back and forth. And I got that back leg behind me, and I'm just like, in my mind, I'm like, I might lose my job right today, right? And he didn't, right? And I'm like, okay, one step this way, and I'm gonna have to do something, right? But he just keeps going back and forth. And then I just we just leave. My buddy's like, oh, Jimmy, like pays for his stuff like as fast as he can.
Everyone's heart's beating fast.
And it's silent. There's like not a peep in Walmart, right? As we leave, this little lady looks at me and she goes, thank you. Like, thank you. And I'm just, he goes, I'm a grown, you talk to me, I'm a grown whatever man. I go, I'm a grown man too. So I didn't push it, but I just stood there. Probably shouldn't have said that part, but I just stood there and just let him know, hey brother, it's not okay. And it's not my job to fix everybody either, but it's like that I'm not ready to let go of that yet.
Yep. It's good. Yeah. And I think that, escalation, when to and not to, in that regard, are you reacting in your emotion? Right. And Galatians 5 is really clear about, the fruits of the spirit, but it also talks about what the flesh looks like.
Yeah.
And it talks about these outbursts of anger, right? Am I being driven by my feeling at this moment? Or am I being driven by training? Training for us is training in godliness. Now, you said you wanted to talk about Jesus going through and turning over the money chambers, right? Because, and again, I want to look at Jesus as the model, right? Because if our aim is to be more like Jesus, and to live to honor God in our life, right? We have to look at his life as a model. And we see Jesus stepping in as a protector of women, right? Let's just get that out on the table. And I think that's some things that many people would know, right? In Luke 8, we're told that he delivered Mary from her demons. In John 8, we're told about this woman that was caught in adultery, about to be stoned by a bunch of men. And you alluded to this on the podcast too, right? As they have their stones ready to throw, Jesus comes out and steps between the woman and the men, right? So there's number one.
Yep.
To get to her, you've got to come through me.
That's right.
Right? And then he just simply kind of looks throughout the cloud or looks throughout the crowd and starts writing in the sand. We don't know what he wrote, right? Like there's been discussions of what that might be.
Sure.
But I don't want to, where the Bible's silent, I want to stay silent.
Yeah.
But in this case, what we know is that a lot of these guys dropped their rocks, all of them, as a matter of fact, and walked off. And he's like, hey, where's your accusers? He's like, I don't accuse you either.
Yeah.
Go on. Now, at the end of, as he's about to go to the cross or he's hanging on the cross, he looks down at his mom and tells John, hey, this is your mom. You've got to protect her now. And it says that John took Jesus' mom off into his house to be her protector, to be her provider. So now I look at this, all these times that Jesus has stepped in as a protector, but you wanted to talk about this time that Jesus did have some emotion, especially when it came to dishonoring God's house, right? So
I think that is a beautiful example of Christ showing us, use your intellect. Like think of something that is true. So they're trying to do this thing, and to get to her, you got to go through me. But then not being physical and using, what an amazing thing of just, he knows that they're all guilty. He's know they're all sin. Let the first one he without sin, let him has the first stone. They're like, so what an amazing way to defuse that, right? And I think based on the society you live in and the person you are, you're going to fill those blanks in differently. Like people that are maybe a fighter, or they're violent, or they're this or that, or maybe they're just a hothead. They're really drawn to the Jesus fashioned a whip and changed out the money changers, right? And people that are more passive, or more calm, or you live in more luxury in your area of the world, you're drawn to the turn the other cheek, which I believe has to do with revenge, right? But it's the turn the other cheek. Again, when that's all you've got, that's your verse, man. You're like, okay, whatever. And again, you don't have to win. It's not like I think a lot of your confidence probably comes from Jiu Jitsu. Mine comes from SEAL teams or shooting guns or whatever. But if it truly came from Christ, it doesn't mean because I'm likely to win the fight. It's because it's the right thing to do.
For
right?
sure.
If you're solid in the foundation with Jesus Christ and you go, might get my tail kicked right now, but I'm going in. You know what I mean? It's like, this is cowboy SEAL, whatever, but it's wrong. So I'm going to stand up, take a beat, and I'm going to do whatever, whatever, that kind of thing. But I think that, and this is an amazing conversation to have with people. To take it clearly states that he fashioned a whip, and it clearly states that he ran out the money changers, and some people say, well, he only hit the animals. I'm like, how do you know? It doesn't say that, but they fill in the blanks with their idea of Jesus. The Mother Teresa Jesus that I know and love would not strike a human being with a whip. Okay. And I don't think he made a whip like they tore the flesh off his back, because you don't fashion that in a couple seconds. Right. But did he strike anybody? Like, we don't know that. Right. So I know that if your money was here and there was thousands of people here, I'm not going to run you out by saying, I got a whip. It's not like an AK. They're like, okay, so do I. Like, what's the deal here? There'd have to be more than that if you flip over their money and chase out their capital,
for sure,
right? Their livestock. But I think that people do, like, if people are even at an unhealthy level, they're like, but he whipped people. It's like, that's always your verse. You're just a mad dude, right? Or it's like, turn the other cheek. That's always your verse because you're a weak dude, right? Yeah. But I think that there is there is a lot that we have to figure out based off the character of Jesus Christ and the whole Bible, by the way. Yeah. But Jesus Christ is.
Well, listen, I think I heard Francis Chan say it once. He said that I can make you believe anything that I want you to believe according to Scripture, right? So if a guy is a passive guy, he'll use a scripture like turning the other cheek to justify not responding in a way that might be appropriate as a protector.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right. Because we know in Scripture also, I think it was Matthew 26 in the garden, when the betrayal went down, right? What happens, man? Peter pulls out his sword and starts ripping off the guy's ear, the Roman centurion's ear, right? The guards. And then Jesus is like, hey, hey man, put your sword away, right?
Yeah.
Tells Peter. He says, don't you know I could call down a legion of angels right now, but then the will of my Father wouldn't happen,
Yeah.
right? So according to God's will, there wasn't a response of calling down this legion of angels just to wipe out everyone that was there, right? So I think that it's important to understand that the response also has to be in line with what God's will is for the situation. So, again, I go back to this Galatians 5 verse because, I always desire to live in a way that that my life produces the fruit of the Spirit, which is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, right? And that's, self-control is just what Jesus did.
Mhm.
It was power under control. I could have, but I didn't.
Right.
But I'm telling you, I could have.
Yeah.
I could have. But we know that also that when we follow the nature of our sinful self, right, the results are clear: sexual immorality, impurity, lustful pleasures, idolatry, sorcery, hostility, quarreling, jealousy, outbursts of anger, selfish ambition, dissension, division, envy, drunkenness, wild parties, and other sins like these, right? So these are evidence of the flesh, right? So if I'm reacting in a situation, am I acting out in a way that honors God, right? But also honors the people that are around me, that, I'm leading by example, right? So if I want my son to step up into the gap and be the protector of his mother when I'm not around, if I'm out traveling, right? And if he sees me not stepping in the gap for her, well, obviously he's not going to do it either.
Yeah.
Right? Do you agree?
Yeah, you got to show them. You can say whatever you want. Again, Facebook,
Yes.
where words have become so cheap, you got to teach your family that words still mean something here. Like honor, integrity, accountability means something in the Graham household,
Yes.
right? So like that kind of thing does produce fruit. We don't get to abuse people and call it Jesus.
Correct.
We don't get to be cowards and call it Jesus.
Yes.
The answer is somewhere in the middle. Like from a position of strength, you can make decisions to do whatever as according to Jesus' call in your life, but never a position of weakness.
Yeah. Well, and we also have to acknowledge that there is a consequence for our actions, right? In this case, we're dealing with Hollywood, right? If it was you or me that went up and smacked Chris Rock in the mouth, we'd be facing probably 10 years in prison.
Yeah.
Right. For sure. We'd be facing the judge in the next coming weeks, right? Will Smith, not a thing. He sits down in his chair, enjoys the rest of the Oscars after party, and then comes to find out this week that he's going to get a 10-year suspension from the Oscars. That's the consequence.
Yeah.
Right. You see the double standard?
Yeah. Can I throw out the question that I
would love it. Yes,
okay.
do it.
So again, I am not saying that Will Smith is anything like, Jesus, anything like that. Could this be a faith crisis for Will Smith? In your opinion? I mean, and forget about everything we know about the Oscars and all this garbage and his wife and the things that he's allowed in his home, which probably made it worse, quite frankly, the things in the marriage and all that stuff, that you can say this doesn't bother you. Yeah, right. You're talking to men here. We know this bothers you to have your wife. I never knew what is it, cuckold? I never knew the definition of that word, right? To have the husband of a woman that sleeps around, whatever.
Yeah.
That cuts deep, right? So then it boils over. But if you look at scripture and look at the men that Christ has used, and I would love to see that, quite frankly. I would love to see this talented actor that obviously is a train wreck, right? And then I think it was a very cool thing what happened with Denzel. And I don't know much about Denzel. I know what I read, and that he seems like a squared away guy, and I've seen him speaking, and he does reference Christ and all this. I don't know enough about him to make that call, right? But what an amazing opportunity for this guy to speak the truth into me. And even the fact what he said about that, he's like, thank you, D. And he was like, hey, Denzel told me at your highest moment, be careful because that's when the devil will come for you. That was a cool exchange, right? No matter how they got there, it would be amazing to see him speak into his life and this be a thing that one wakes up the world and say, hey, this has nothing to do with the real world. Like these are people performing.
Yep.
Will Smith, you see on I Am Legend and these iRobot, that's not the guy.
Yes.
This guy's a train wreck, right?
Yeah.
But now you're seeing what's real behind the scenes, and it's not a pretty picture. To have someone mentor you back to that and then possibly even have a breakthrough. If you read the words, and I read those words from his speech talking about that he feels that he's being called to be a leader of his people and to be a better man for all that stuff. That's good stuff. He just can't live it. He can say it, But now it means less.
Well, and again, it's hard to understand what's, filtering it through Hollywood, right? What's being produced by his handlers, like, hey, you have to go make this right and say this right now because culture is mad at you.
Yeah.
Right. Versus him having an honest conversation with the world and saying, hey, listen, here's where my heart's at.
Yeah.
This is the stuff that I'm dealing with. This is real stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm typically pretty quiet about it, but now I can't be because I've had this incident occur and I need to talk about it and the things that I'm struggling with. And I think, just having real honest conversations as men about these things would be nice. And again, I would love to have been in the room to hear what was said with Denzel. And I think, and I would hope that it would be, honorable from him if he is a believer in Christ. Again, I don't judge anyone's heart. I don't know where he stands. I know that he said some things about God and Christ in public. But again, if it was something that he had said to him in that moment, like, hey man, this is the moment you got to consider faith, that would be awesome to hear, and maybe that's why God allowed it, in his life. Right. So, man, what a great discussion tonight. It was so
deep, man.
So rich. And
the more
fruitful.
I think about it, there's so much to talk about
and listen
and figure out. Yeah.
And this is for men that are listening, right? This is for you to navigate where you are as a man tonight or today, wherever you're listening, right? It's a good question to ask yourself. How would you have responded? Would you have responded in a way that was honoring both God and your wife or your family? Or would you have, kind of stood behind the scenes and not have acted in a way and maybe had your wife question whether or not you love her, that you're going to be a protector and a provider, right? To live to honor her as you made your vows to do, right? So there's a lot to consider as men, in today and navigating, what culture throws at us and what the Bible says we're to be as men. So, as we do with every podcast, Jimmy, we do these closing thoughts. And so anything that, that you want to end with, that's going on with Abel Shepherd or things that you can encourage guys, to, if they have trouble, I tell guys if they're struggling with, with being passive, and it is, I'm not saying go out and be aggressive. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there's a dichotomy between this passiveness and aggressiveness that you have to navigate as a man in society today. But if you're having trouble making decisions, then I tell people, come out and do jiu-jitsu, right? At least it gives you a reference point, and has you making decisions real life with real life action coming at you. And now you do that at Abel Shepherd too. You put people in real life situations. How would you have, I would have shot that guy. No, you wouldn't. You actually froze. You didn't even pull your weapon out, because you were just stuck. And we've seen, Jared and I went and visited, some of these live action drills that you run. And we saw professionally trained people making decisions that were hard. And they were life or death in some of these circumstances. So,
yeah, I think that as a final thought, if you talked about a foundation in jiu-jitsu, you're walking with me, once a week, we go over some basics and all that kind of stuff. And there's a foundation. If I'm working with people with firearms and being a bodyguard or protector at any level, we talk about a foundation. If you don't know what you stand for and have a foundation in Christ, I think that all of that other stuff is just, it's kind of fluff. You know what I mean? So I've heard it said this way. I can't remember if it was G.K. Chesterton. Somebody said this, is that when the author walks back on the stage, the play is over. What are you going to be doing at that point? You know what I mean? So to try to find some kind of security or masculinity in the stuff that we do, I'm like, hey, this is great what we do. This can't be your identity. This cannot be your identity, right? Now, if you want to find fellowship and get with some like-minded people that are on the same road that haven't figured it out, let's figure it out together. Let's be a healthy place that when your kids walk in here, when you walk in here, you walk out better. When your kids walk in here, you walk out better. That's as good as it gets right there. But if I didn't have a foundation, I would expect them to walk back out of the room, right? So I think showing people that in the world just saw this display, they can do whatever they want with it. But I think that's happened millions of times a day, meaning that the world is watching you. They're watching you to figure out the man they want to be. Now, whether they follow it or not, that's totally up to them. But you are a teacher and a leader. You're teaching people right and wrong. You're leading them to heaven or hell every single day, right? And you're watching other people. And some people, I go, we're done here. I will never put my kids around you again. And we're gone. I can't present that option, right? But this is a real thing. It's happening every second of every day. And then when something goes bad, people try to come on and pretend they're somebody else. And I'm like, no, you're not. I've been watching you.
For sure. Yeah. if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything.
That's right.
Right. And what a great discussion tonight. And men, if you're listening in, if you haven't checked out Abel Shepherd, I'd encourage you to do so. We teach jiu-jitsu here. We actually do the podcast at Bohm Jitsu here in Castle Rock, Colorado. So if you're listening in and you're in the Denver surrounding area, feel free to drop in and say hello, and we'll get you on the mat. Any parting words, Jared?
Parting thoughts, like I was just thinking kind of like spiritually about this, like, right, we're talking about being mentally prepared, but it's kind of like a conversation I had with my daughter this last week. She was going into something and kind of caught it. And then I was like, well, what were you going to do? She's like, well, I don't know. I was just going to go and do it. I'm like, you didn't have a battle plan. You didn't have a plan of action that was going to lead you down a road that was going to end up with you possibly compromising, with you possibly sinning, right? And like part of what Ephesians talks about putting on the full armor of God, like we're constantly at war spiritually, right? We're constantly being faced with these things. And if we don't walk out with a battle plan, if we don't move out there with all of our protective gear, if we don't have the actual weapons, we don't have a sword, you can't just go to battle without being fully prepared. And that was just kind of like what I was thinking about this entire conversation. It's like, just like looking at it like at a spiritual level, do we go out every single day with a battle plan, with the full armor, like ready for the moment we get attacked to be able to respond appropriately? Are we going to be a Will Smith in how we respond? Are we going to be a turn the other cheek? Are we going to be like the guy that just sees his family get attacked and then he just stands there and then he jumps back scared for his own, because now he's more concerned about himself than his family, right? And I think that also applies spiritually to us, right?
Yeah, agreed. And that's great. Great ending thought there, buddy. Well, everyone have a great night, and we'll see you next week.